Awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to My Other's Keeper. I am so happy today. I have made a new friend. I think we're going to become best buds. Okay,
Yeah.
I have no control over that, but I think we're going to get along okay. This is Kristen. Kristen, just so
Hi.
you're aware, when you point to talk to me, you want to point the opposite direction that you think you have to point. That's a thing with StreamYard. There you go. Yes.
Is it working? Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Great.
Okay. So, all right. There we go. Oh, this necklace, I've been having necklace issues. So, alrighty. Okay, so today, what were we going to talk about? Do you recall?
I think we talked about a lot of different things we could
Mhm.
talk about, but one of the things we hit on was the idea of like being in a helping position or profession, like as someone
Mhm.
who wants to help others and help others heal, and how it's important to kind of meet people where they are and kind of
Right,
come alongside someone instead of
right,
ask them to be or do something different right away.
exactly. The way I had it listed was to live in somebody else's reality. So, say for
Yeah.
example, somebody has Alzheimer's and they're 6 years old and they're in fact 82. So you meet them as
Mhm.
the 6 year old, right? You don't meet them as
Mhm.
this adult who should have all of their ducks in a row and that kind of stuff. So let's talk a little bit
Exactly.
about that. Um, I have told quite a few people about this. Several were extremely excited. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat a little bit. And if anybody has questions, please ask. We are more than happy to talk about whatever you like. But I do want to remind you that this is just for information. Okay. No medical advice is to be assumed because while Kristen is actually a professional psychologist, she doesn't have your file. So there's no assessment and everything else that needs to be done to get to know you and
Right.
decide what exactly needs to happen. So,
Well, I'll say I'm a licensed professional counselor, not a psychologist. I got
great.
2 years of grad school. Psychologists have like 4 and some change, so they can do a little more than I can, but we can both do therapy. So I
So
didn't
she's
wanna
a therapist.
misrepresent myself. Yes, yes.
All
I'm
right.
trained as a therapist.
That works. Okay. So that's interesting that you can be only called a therapist or a counselor if you only have 2 years. So have you completed your master's?
Yes. So the way that it works, at least in the United States, in my state, which is the state of Texas, each state in the United States has their own licensing boards for doing mental health counseling or therapy or psychology.
Mhm.
There's a different board that oversees psychologists than the one that oversees my qualifications, which licensed professional counselors were what's known as like mid-level practitioners, which is kind of
Okay.
like your RN to your doctor, right? Like a psychologist might be like the counterpart to like your MD sort of, and an LPC, which is like my licensure, might be your counterpart to like a registered nurse. I can do therapy, I can do counseling with people. Um, but there are certain like assessment tools and things that I can't use because it's not part of my qualifications.
Okay. Okay. So in Canada, I don't know if you're allowed to use, I should ask my daughter. My daughter, by the way, has
Mhm.
finished her undergrad in psychology. She did it twice. Not because she
That's
didn't do well,
awesome.
but because one actually had a thesis component and one didn't have a thesis component. We were told by the university she went to without the thesis component that, oh, yeah, we're perfect with everybody. Hey, you can do your master's, doctorate, everything from here.
Oh,
They lied.
and it
Anyway,
wasn't. Ugh,
yeah.
that's
So
that's annoying. But she
she had to
got
go.
double the the knowledge and double the training, I guess.
Exactly. And she actually ended up with some amazing, like she got some really good awards and stuff like that, and ropes and things on her, yeah, as she
That's
graduated.
cool.
And yeah, the girl did good. The girl did good.
That's so
But
great.
she is now in the process of applying for either a master's or a doctorate. She's not sure
Great.
exactly which one she's going to get, simply because she doesn't know where she's going to get accepted.
Sure.
So I'm going to have to ask her the designation of psychologist versus counselor versus doctor of psychology.
Sure.
Because,
So, mhm,
yeah, I know that a doctor of psychology is definitely a psychologist, but I
yes, definitely.
thought that an MA psych or an M psych was also a psychologist, just not a doctor.
So how it works here is, so I got my undergraduate degree, I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and
Yep.
then I went to graduate school for an additional 2-year degree, and I got my Master of Science in Counseling Psychology. So that alone doesn't give me the ability to do therapy with people. After that, that's just kind of like the basis. I then have to go do what's called like an internship. I have to find a board approved supervisor to
Hmm.
oversee me, working with people in the mental health field and supervise me while I'm doing that and sort of teach me along the way. And we have to, at least in the state of Texas, we have to get 3,000 hours of supervised experience. And at least half of it has to come from direct client contact. So you're actually
Hmm.
working with people, whether that's
Hmm.
through therapy or crisis intervention or like skills training, things like that. And then another part of it can come from like education, like continuing ed credits and documentation and things like that. That's what's called indirect. It's still part of the whole picture, but you're not face to face with a person that you're working with, but it's part of the whole picture. And it's only
Oh,
after that that I can then apply to my board for a license to practice counseling independently in the state of Texas. So I finished grad school in a couple of years for my master's degree, but I actually spent some time working in the field where I didn't have a board approved supervisor. So I worked for
mm,
about 2 years in a community mental health clinic, just as what was called a qualified mental health professional, which is
right,
like a master's level person who has supervised experience. And I wasn't doing therapy per se, really. It was more very specific, like what's called skills training.
right,
Like you're not delving into someone's past, you're not getting really, really deep into things, but you're working on things like coping skills, like how to deal with anxiety on a day-to-day basis, like breathing techniques, stuff like that. Um,
right.
Therapy is gonna go way more in depth. You're gonna get back into someone's history,
Hmm.
and that's why you have to have a license to practice that independently. So I worked there for a
Hmm.
couple years at a clinic in Dallas, and then I found a board approved supervisor to work with, and took another 2 years to get my hours before I was independently licensed. So it took
Okay.
me, when all was said and done, outside of school, it probably took me about 4 years to get my full license. But and some people do it faster. Some people
Yep.
find a supervisor immediately and get going. Um, I don't know that I do it any differently because I spent more time working in the field and I got more experience in getting to know
Exactly.
people.
Yeah.
Know that I
Yeah. The
would have
only
wanted
way
to do
that
it
could
any
have been
quicker.
better is had those people hours that you did spend, had they been supervised so they could go towards your
Yes.
license. It's the only
Yes,
way I
if they
think it
had
could have gone
counted
better.
if they had counted, I could have got my license to practice independently a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Um, but really right out of graduate school, I was just really excited to go to work. Like I wanted to
Hmm.
hit the ground running. I wanted to start helping people. Like I was
Hmm.
always a helper. Like I was
Yeah.
really, really passionate about just getting started. And
Well,
that's
that's
part of
all.
the reason I applied to master's programs and not doctoral programs. Because doctoral programs, I knew that was going to be like 4 or 5 years. And I was
Hmm.
like, I don't want to wait that long to get started.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with my daughter, oh boy, this necklace thing is just going to annoy me. Okay.
That's a
With my
beautiful
daughter,
necklace.
um, she there are different designations in Canada. One of them is psychologist, doctor of psychology, and social worker. You can
Mhm,
be a social worker with a psychology degree under the designation, and then you register under the designation of social worker. You could
mhm,
get a undergrad in social work and then a master's of social work. So, like, there's a whole pile of different ways. And then the way it was
mhm,
described to me, the difference between a social worker and a psychologist is, like you said, a psychologist really kind of gets in deep into the brain stuff, and a social worker
mhm.
does more practical. So,
that's pretty similar to here.
yeah.
Although we have a just to make everything complicated, we have like, there's different licensure types that can do what I do in practice therapy, like, my license is called LPC for licensed professional counselor, but
Mhm.
there are also LCSWs for licensed clinical social workers. There are
Right.
also LMFTs, which are licensed marriage and family therapists, and we are
Ah.
all under the same board that, oversees our work,
Mhm.
but they all come from a slightly different
Yeah.
theoretical orientation, like social
Right.
work. Like I was in psychology, so I can only speak to, can't speak really
Yeah.
in depth about the social work
Right.
perspective, but from what I understand, it looks more at like the systems around a person, not
Yes.
just like, whereas psychology is going to focus more like on an individual level. I mean, we take into account like the environment too. Of course, any good therapist is going to do that, but um,
Absolutely.
the approach in the training in the coursework is a little bit different, a little bit more
Right.
individual focused in psychology.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I just realized I did not link to the lifeboat. Mary, is it possible for you to link me to the lifeboat, or do I have to do it from here? And hi, Brian. Nice to see you.
Hi,
Um,
Brian. Hi,
I
Mary.
haven't forgotten about you. I will talk to you. You just have a really amazing story, and it's hard for me to wrap my brain. I'm going to have Brian Lucas on sometime in the future. I
Awesome.
promise you.
Oh, cool.
But he has such a developed story that has so many moving parts. I'm having a hard time poking one that we could talk about one piece here, one piece here, one piece, because it's like spaghetti. It's everywhere. It's
Like where
I
to start.
okay.
He says, I'm not worried. We trust you, Kim. You got it.
You
We know you
trust
got our
me.
back.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about if I were to be in somebody else's um the word has escaped me. In somebody else's reality, for lack of a
Mhm.
better phrase. What would that look like? How would I best navigate that space?
Sure. So I think that there's an impulse, like a drive when you meet somebody who is maybe not seeing things as they are, who maybe is having a hallucination or a delusion or whose memory has been altered so that they're not really here in the same present that you are. I think we have kind of a natural desire to want to correct them and like kind of want to bring them back with us, because we feel like, no, no, you come back here with me. Like this is how it really is. um, but usually what's happening in that person's brain, like on a physiological level, it makes that not only difficult, but really emotionally jarring and upsetting for a person.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's going to look different depending on what the person has going on. Like, for example, someone with like a psychotic disorder who's having hallucinations, it's going to look a little different than someone who maybe has like dementia or Alzheimer's and feels like they're
Right,
in a different time and space.
right.
Um, my experience, like during my first 2 years in the field, largely was working with people who had schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, similar disorders that sometimes do have psychotic symptoms, like hallucinations, where you might be seeing and hearing things that aren't there. Um, you might believe things despite evidence to the contrary. But
And
for
that would
those
be called a
people,
delusion, correct?
right, right. A delusion would be you're not seeing something physically, you're not hearing something that's not there, but you have this idea in your head about how things are and about how the way they're working. And even if it's not realistic or likely, you
Mhm.
believe that very strongly, like as strongly as I know that I'm sitting in a chair. It's
Exactly.
extremely real to the person.
Yeah.
Um, and this is a very common kind of delusion people have, so I'm not sharing any one person's story here. I'm not breaking any confidentiality there, but I would sometimes have people that would work with me who might, for example, they might be in the midst of a psychotic episode and they might believe that the CIA is chasing them, that the CIA is out to
Mhm.
get them, or that the mob is following them and hacking their phone and um, putting cameras in their house. That was another really common delusion that I heard.
Mhm.
Um, and one way that, like, maybe a newer, less experienced clinician might approach that is to try to reassure them, "Okay, there's not cameras in your house, like, that's not really happening." But the reality is, like, on a completely physical, biological level, what's happening in that person's brain, that's absolutely real to them.
Mhm.
So, to tell them it's not, you're it's not expressing to them that you respect them. It's not expressing to them that you appreciate that their perspective. It's not allowing them to trust you. Like
Right.
you know that there's a painting behind you on the wall. And if I
Mhm.
spent this whole hour or whatever I have with you trying to convince you that the painting's not on the wall, you're not going to like me very much. You're not going to trust me very much.
I'll like you just fine, my dear.
But
No.
you're probably not gonna trust me to help you
No, I
if,
probably
like,
won't touch you, but I'll like you
you are
fine.
positive that something is the way it is, and I spend an hour trying to convince you it's not,
Right. Right.
then we're not gonna get to anything important like, "Oh, okay, how do you cope with this situation?" So, for example, like, if a lady came in feeling like the CIA was following her and hacking her phone, um,
Mhm.
maybe they weren't, but whether they were or weren't, that was real to her. So, to kind of join with her and move past that, what I would try to do is look at, well, okay, well, how is she being affected on a day-to-day basis?
Mhm.
She's not able to, keep a stable place to live because she feels like she has to keep running places. She doesn't
Right.
feel safe anywhere. She doesn't feel like she can trust anybody. She can't keep the same phone number, so she can't even keep in touch with me because she feels like she has to keep ditching her phone. So, because
Mhm.
the situation itself, whether it's real to me or not, it's real to her. So, my
Mm.
focus is going to be on her feelings about it and how that's affecting her emotionally and on a day to day basis. And how do we cope with those? Like, and what are some supports we can put in place to help her feel safe,
Yeah,
because that feeling of safety and that feeling of trust,
that's
like, that's gonna
paramount.
be necessary. Yeah, yeah. Like, maybe eventually down the road, something like a medication could help with some of those psychotic symptoms, but she's
If
not
she's
gonna
willing to
trust the
take one,
doctor. Exactly, exactly. She's
or
never
she
gonna
might be
trust that
poisoned,
doctor.
like,
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Or maybe he's working for the CIA. And
that's
and I
right.
think that's what's hard for some people to wrap their brain around is it's entirely real and
Yeah.
on a biological level. Like, you can do brain scans of a person having a hallucination or a delusion, and the same parts of their brain light up, like, regarding, like, visual centers and things like that when they're having a hallucination, as would light up
Mhm.
as when I am seeing my desk in front of me.
Right.
In their inner world, it's no different. So,
Mhm.
for me, I came to the conclusion that I needed to really work first on building a relationship and establishing trust and
Mhm.
finding a way to help them be safe in the moment. Like, if I
Yes.
can help them come to a place where they trust me and they at least trust that maybe I'm not working for the CIA or whoever it might be, and I have their best interests at heart, then maybe
Yeah.
they're more willing to take a suggestion from me on, say, like, a safe shelter they could stay at. Maybe they're more willing to take a suggestion from me on this doctor you could talk to maybe just hear him out about some medication possibilities. But you have
Mhm.
to have that relationship first. And that's really at the core of everything in any good therapy is you have to have good rapport first and you have to have a good therapeutic relationship first. That
Right.
that is what's going to make anything work in
Mhm.
any kind of therapy, really. Um,
Yeah.
if a person doesn't trust you, it's going to be very difficult to help.
Yeah.
So that
Absolutely.
would be just kind of one example, but I'll pause because it looks like
That's
people
okay.
are
Um,
asking things.
Crystal has a question about somebody with DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, otherwise or formerly known as split personality. How do you deal with dealing with somebody who has an alter or um, a separate personality entirely? What do you do there?
Sure. So that's a little bit different than, say, like a hallucination or a full-on psychotic disorder, and
Oh,
it's a little
absolutely.
different than, say, dementia. And there are therapists who specialize specifically in dissociative identity disorder.
Hmm.
I don't, full disclosure, I don't have specialized training in that area. So for
Right.
me, if I had a client come to me and that was what was going on, I would I would let them know up front, hey, this isn't my specialty. I can seek training if you really feel like you wanna work with me and no one else, I'll seek training, but here's some people that really specialize in that and who really, really know it inside and out and who can really,
Right.
really work with you. So just to preface, that's how I would approach that. But
That's a good approach.
dissociative identity disorder develops a little differently. Like
Very.
the common current knowledge is that it develops out of really severe trauma. Something is so traumatic and so upsetting that a person literally has to check out in their mind. They have to go somewhere
Hmm.
else mentally, which is a really sophisticated human coping mechanism that we
Hmm.
have. Like, if you think about it, that's wild that our brains can even do that. Um,
Hmm.
but if it persists and it continues to and it goes on later to interfere with our ability to maybe be present in situations we want to be present in, or we don't feel like we have control over it, um, then that's a different situation. Um, from what I have recently, like I did recently do a CEU on some about dissociation. Um, Dissociation has different levels.
Hmm.
So at the very severe level, someone completely switches and they're not, cognizant of what's going on. They don't realize they've done it. And they might
Hmm.
have blackouts about what they've done or said as this other personality.
Hmm.
That's at the severe end of it. At the less severe end of it, we all dissociate a little bit. Like if you've ever been at a lecture and you zone out and you're thinking about something else, you're dissociating a little bit. So it's a
Perfect.
spectrum, right? There's a healthy end of using this as a
That's a
coping
large
mechanism.
spectrum.
It's really large for sure. Um, but awareness, I think, is key. I mean, you wouldn't want to. I think it's different if you're like I saw Crystal asked, what if you're dealing with a friend? I
That's
think
right.
that's gonna depend on it how much is your friend aware of? Like, do they realize that this is what's happening? Do they understand that they're maybe blacking out and switching and not understanding and not remembering what's going on? If they know that's what's going on and they trust that, then the approach is gonna be more about, well, what's triggering you to have to check out? What's causing that need to escape from the situation? And if it comes from a trauma, it's likely going to be something that on some level reminds us of that trauma, that puts
Right.
us physically back in that headspace. Even if it's not an actual immediate danger, our body might respond as if it is.
So, for example, if it were my friend, okay, so I see my friend, they're suddenly very different than typical. Um,
Mhm.
I know that they've seen or been in a situation that has reopened a traumatic wound. How do I react to their alter or the other personality?
So let me make sure I understand the question right. So in this scenario, you're used
The
to them
person knows that they have an
behaving.
alternate personality.
Sorry.
They know that
Mhm,
they check out.
mhm.
I'm the friend, and I have seen this happen. As the friend, how do I react?
If you're the friend, like, I can tell you what I would do as a friend, like, even completely, like, separating from my, my
Perfect.
therapist hat. As a
That's okay.
friend, if the altar they've switched into is safe and is
Hmm.
not, causing danger to themselves or others,
Hmm.
I'm gonna say they clearly have switched into this for a reason. This is what they
Hmm.
needed in this moment to cope.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna hang out with them. I'm gonna say,
Awesome.
"Oh, okay, I see so and so is here. All right, let's, you like this food instead of that food. Okay, we'll go get that instead." Now, it's a different story if that alter has, if there's some kind of self-injurious behavior involved, like if you have to arrange for some kind of safety, that's different. That's more complicated. But if this is a personality or an alter that, allows them to feel safe and cope in that moment, I'm just gonna hang out with them.
That's
For
exactly
real,
what I would have done.
honestly.
So I'm glad to know I
Yeah.
would have done the right thing. So, because that's my
If you're a
inclination is if I don't see something dangerous going on, if I don't see somebody putting themselves or other at risk,
Mhm.
just let it, you know,
Exactly. Yeah,
unless they're being
just
incredibly rude,
join.
in which case I'll say something because that's
Just
just
hang
rude.
out. Or, like, maybe I guess I could see if, maybe my personality jives really well with this one alter and I don't get along so much with this other alter, then,
Mhm.
I might be honest about that. Like, "Hey, I see, you're really in the mood to watch this instead of that," or whatever else that, manifestation of themselves wants to do, and just let them know, "Hey, no, no hard feelings or anything. I'm just not really into watching this, doing that. So I'm gonna go home, but give me a call in the morning, we can check back in." Um,
Right.
I would do my best not to take it personally because it's not about me, most likely,
Exactly. Yeah.
and, just kinda be honest about where you're at. Usually, I mean, I won't say that's not actually that different from how a therapist might handle it in session.
Okay.
Um, Again, that's not my specialty, but therapists who do specialize in DID
Mhm.
will what they have told me is that if somebody switches like that in session, they'll just start working with that alter and just kind of say, "Oh, I see you feel like you needed to come for the session and you needed to put them in the back seat. What did you want to talk about? And what do you
Yeah.
have going on?"
Yeah.
So it really is just kind of accepting what is as it is. Like, "Oh, okay, you're this person today, so let's talk about it. What do you
Let's
need?"
work with what we've got.
Exactly, just meeting
Yeah.
people where they're at within
Yeah.
reason, people
Exactly.
are being safe.
So going back to somebody in a more common situation, DID is real, but it's very rare. So let's go back to a little bit more of a common situation. Um, I have bipolar disorder. It's a psychotic disorder. And there are times when I have had psychotic moments. And I put air
Mhm.
quotes beside that because I know that it's not reality. Like I've had hallucinations that I know are hallucinations.
Like, in the
Um,
moment,
in the
you're
moment, I know
aware in
it.
that moment.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. My favorite hallucination. Love it. My husband and I were out for a Chinese dinner, Chinese food one night, and we were eating some food. And as you do, you order a number of different things. And one of the things we ordered was lemon chicken, and we tasted it.
Mhm.
I'm like, "Honey, how is this for you?" He's like, "Oh, it's really good lemon chicken." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." I was having the sweetest, richest, silkiest milk chocolate you've ever had in your entire life. And but I knew that I wasn't having that, but that was my experience.
You
So
had a taste
I had a taste
hallucination.
hallucination, and it's happened a couple of times. At the same restaurant, I had spring rolls and put the peanut
Wow.
sauce on it, and it tasted like a banana. Without the peanut sauce, it tasted just like a regular boring old spring roll. Put the sauce on
Hopefully,
it.
it's tasting like something good, even if it's not what you thought it would be.
If it would be that would be the worst. Oh, yuck.
Hopeful as long as it tastes like something good.
Exactly. Exactly. So what do you do in situations where you know it's not the reality, but
Like, as the
it
friend,
is
as
the
the supporter, as the
reality?
family member?
Yeah.
Like, what would I do? Like, if I were sitting with you at dinner and you said the spring roll actually tastes like coffee or whatever else,
Yep. Yep.
me, honestly, I would say, "Oh, that's cool. Is it good coffee? That's not what I taste, but what's it like for you?" Like, I would take a curious approach, and that's part of my personality in general, but it's also a part of, like, the way I was taught as a therapist is to be constantly open and curious about other people's experience because they're just as valid as mine. I might not be tasting chocolate, but that doesn't mean you're not, um,
Is it good chocolate at
and
least?
yeah, yeah, that's what I would ask exactly, that's what I would ask you, like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a situation where it's not particularly dangerous, right? Unless it really upsets you, then it might get dangerous if it really bothers you, but if
Yeah.
it's not upsetting and it's not bothering to you, my approach is one of curiosity and openness of like, "Oh, well, I taste lemon chicken, but what does it taste like to you? That's really cool. That's neat that
Yeah.
you can taste it differently." And
And it has
if it's not
happened just like
bothering you.
twice, maybe three times in 20 years. But,
Yeah.
like, so it's incredibly rare, but it has happened.
Yeah. I actually
Um,
have not before you told me about your experience, I had never no one had ever told me about having a taste hallucination before. I've met lots of people who've told me about, like, their visual or auditory hallucinations, but no one
mhm.
had ever told I knew that people had them, but I'd never met someone that told me about it before. So, my my, openness and curiosity about it is genuine, like, I wanna know what that's like for you. Does it upset you when it happens, or is it just kinda like, "Oh, huh, this is something?"
My poor husband has to put up with a lot.
Well, I guess it's a
Oh
bummer if
well,
you were not in the mood for chocolate.
yeah. No, but along with my own hallucinations, my stepdad, my papa, he had Alzheimer's for a number of years. And along with losing his processing ability, he started to believe he was living at the airport because for
Wow.
his working life, a lot of time he spent at the airport waiting to fly overseas because he worked overseas. So, where do we go with something like that?
Oh, so for him, that was based in, like, a time in his life where he was in the airport a lot.
He's in a time warp.
So, it wasn't
Yeah.
wasn't completely out of left field. He was
No.
remembering back to a time in his life, and he was there in his mind, in his
Hmm.
body. So, it's interesting because this actually came up in, like, we took a couple of specific courses related to psychology of, working with counseling with older adults, issues around dementia came up, working with death and dying, things like that. And the consensus is kind of similar is that if where they are in their mind is not creating a danger, it's
Hmm.
not creating a problem for them, it's
Hmm.
not, you don't necessarily need to argue with them and try to bring them back. Like,
Right.
or unless there's, like, an instrumental reason. Like, if you're taking someone to the doctor's office and they need to understand why and what's going on without,
Yeah.
being upset or frightened, then obviously you need to kind of guide them through that, and it might take the picture of like, "Hey, we're gonna leave the airport for a little while to go see the doctor." You know? You're not completely spending a whole lot of time trying to argue with, "Well, you're not in the airport, you haven't been in the airport for 20 years." Um,
Right.
that's gonna be really upsetting and really jarring to a person because, again, the part that's similar to a psychotic disorder is that's really where they are in their mind and in their body. That's real to them, and if I think about it, like, if I try to take that perspective, like, for me, it's very real that I'm sitting in my office at home and I have this desk in
Hmm.
front of me and that it's 2024 and it's May. If somebody busts in here and spent a whole lot of time telling me, "Oh, it's not 2024, Kristen. What are you doing? It's actually 2078," and actually, like, that would be really upsetting for me. And it's
Wouldn't it
not
be
gonna
though?
help me. Yeah, that would be really scary, like, if you
Yeah.
think about it from that perspective, and it I
Hmm.
would be, like, more likely to get upset, I would be more likely to and when we're upset, we're never at our best, right? That's when we do things
Oh,
like
for sure.
panic. If we're gonna get we're more likely to get belligerent and things like that if we're really scared and really upset, because that's what
Hmm.
people do, that's what humans do. Um, so for me, I would take the approach of as little correcting of that as possible. Like, in my view and in the view that we took in my coursework was that that person is in this place and time in their mind for a reason. It's adaptive for them. It's allowing them to cope with their reality. It's allowing them to be happy. So
Yeah.
as long as it's not dangerous, let them be there, you know? And you might have to reorient a little bit. Like, if you have to go take them somewhere, you might have to explain that, so that someone's not frightened or confused more than necessary.
Hmm.
Um, but I had kind of an experience even before I took any coursework when I was a little kid. I had an experience like that with my grandmother who, she remembered me as a small child,
Hmm.
but I got older.
Hmm.
And when we went to visit her, she kinda, like, looked at me, "Oh, okay, you're you." And then she looked at my mom and she said, "Didn't you have another, like, little girl? Like, a younger girl?" And she was remembering me as a
Yeah.
little girl. And
Yeah.
like even then, my inclination was like my mother explained it to me. She said, "Oh, she's remembering you as a little girl. She doesn't realize you're the same person." And so
Right.
my inclination was just kind of like, "Oh, that's just how it is for her. That's okay." Like, that's fine.
You're
I'll just
very
say,
normal,
"Oh,
too, aren't you?
I'm
Kind of a
I'm related to her." That's kind of how I approached it was like, "Oh, I'm related to her." Like, I'm related to her. And we are. That's not even a lie. That's not even inaccurate. I am
right.
related to the smaller me. I'm
That's
not the
right.
same person anymore, but I am
That's right.
related to her. I
Well,
am
and
very
Mary
good with
says
people.
that it's her dad's heavenly birthday tomorrow. He was a warrior to the end dealing with
Oh,
dementia. And
I
Miss
love
Dragon's
that.
here. Hello. Um, but yeah,
I love
dealing with somebody who has dementia, um,
mhm,
how my mom was a long-term care aide in nursing homes almost
mhm,
my entire growing up life.
mhm,
So when her husband, my stepdad, developed dementia, she just took it on, ready to go. We can do this, no problem. And she hid it
mhm.
from the rest of us. She made excuses for him and
Wow.
all of that other stuff. So for a good 10, 15 years, we had no clue that he had been suffering from this.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
How
I
did
mean,
they keep that from you guys?
part of the deficiency or deficit, that's the word I'm looking for, was his
Mhm,
processing ability. That was one of the first things to
mhm,
go. So she was able to cover up for him. Oh, no, he meant this. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And she would just laugh things off
mm,
or that
okay.
kind of
She was doing the
um
covering thing.
she was doing the covering thing. And yeah, toward the end, of course, oh, I got to tell you this. Before he died, he ended up with, we weren't sure if it was MRSA or if it was something else, MRSA, um, or if it
Mhm,
was another resistant virus or bacteria or something like that. But he was in the
wow.
hospital for about a month or so before he died. And
Wow.
in order to take care of him and figure out what it was, they had to take him off every medication he was on, everything. So for
Wow.
the last 3 weeks of his life, he came back to us, came back to us.
Wow. Like
I
he was
know,
lucid and
right?
he knew where he was and
Yep.
who everyone
He knew
was?
who we were. He
Wow.
knew all of that stuff. He could barely talk because at some point he had quit talking, right? So then
Mhm,
your vocal cords aren't going to want to work. But no, he
mhm,
knew who we were. He knew who mom was for sure. He's like, "Don't you leave me. Don't you go anywhere." It's like, "I've been
mhm.
missing you." Um, and so yeah, it was amazing. So when he finally died, it was a moment of rejoicing that he was no longer in pain, that he knew who we were. We all got to say everything we needed to in private
Wow.
with him.
Wow.
And so there was nothing left to grieve. It was wonderful. So yeah, like that. I know
What a
that
gift
is a
that he came back
probably a
like
one
that.
in a million experience. But
I
yeah.
think that's very unique. What a gift that is, though.
Oh, was it ever? Yeah. Yeah. And Miss Dragon is big pharma is not our
Mhm.
friend. And in a lot of cases, you are correct.
In
I
older
personally
adults
thought it was gonna
especially,
stay. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
In older adults especially, there's something called polypharmacy,
Hmm.
where as you get more and more physical and maybe mental ailment, you're more likely to be prescribed more and more medication. But as we age, our body doesn't metabolize that stuff as fast. Our
Right.
body doesn't clear it as quickly. So sometimes that stuff will build up in an older person's body in a way it might not in a younger person. And the
Hmm.
effects are going to be stronger than maybe they were originally intended. So
Oh.
because I guess the way you think about it is like, if I take a medication every day, it's gonna be at a certain base level as long as I keep taking that every day, and my body's
Hmm.
gonna keep, like, moving it out. That's why I have to keep
Right.
taking it every day. For an older
Right.
person whose metabolism is not as fast, that base level is gonna keep going up and up and up because they can't move it out as quickly as they're taking it in. So, that's
Interesting.
why it's really important for older adults to follow up on medications and, like, really have an advocate for them on how they're seeing behavior change and their
Mhm.
energy levels change and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, because you might start out with something that just gives you maybe a mild sedative effect, but over time it builds up in your body and suddenly you're just like can barely get
You're
out of bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm glad somebody brought that up.
Yeah. Well,
I
I'm
haven't got
just
to
gonna
talk
say
about
on my
polypharmacy in years.
pardon?
I
You
haven't got to
haven't?
talk about polypharmacy with anyone in years.
Oh, hi, Mary. I just took my pain meds. Boy. And the exercise endorphins have worn off.
Oh,
That
bummer.
happens.
Those en we
Um,
love those endorphins, though, if you can
aren't
get
they
them.
great? Endorphins are wonderful.
Yep,
On
yep,
the other hand, I'm not a fan of big pharma, but I appreciate what it does for my brain chemistry.
sure.
There are people out there who think that they can treat the ailments that I've had over the years with herbs and oils and all of these other sorts of things. And if that's the way they're going to deal with it,
Mhm.
and I'm not
If it
going to try
works
to
for
convince
them.
you to go the pharmaceutical way. Um, but I do know for me and for a lot of people I am familiar with, um, having the right pharmaceuticals has really helped. Just
It
was
can be a lifesaver.
it can be, it really can. Yeah.
I think it's important to that's where it's really important to have a doctor that you trust that listens to
Hmm.
you. Um, and that can be difficult to find, more so
Hmm.
in some places than others. A really
Hmm.
good prescriber can be kind of a unicorn in some places.
Yeah.
It's really good if you can have somebody you trust go with you, kind of
Yeah.
like a friend or family member as like an advocate,
Hmm.
um, because they ask a lot of questions and there's a lot going on, and sometimes it's nice to have a second person there to say, "Well, hey, what was it that you asked her?" Like, "Well, what about this?" They might catch something that I missed, and I mean, I do kind of I can say that there's problems with pharmaceuticals as a profit-driven business, you know?
Yes. Yep.
At its worst, you see medications that were designed for one thing getting prescribed off label for all kinds of things, and,
Exactly.
in some cases, you even see new new disorders coming out that didn't exist before, and
Oh,
lo and
that's
behold, we have the perfect medication for it. Um,
scary. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
yeah, that
Um,
that happens, but
and to
at
have a
its
general
best,
practitioner
yeah.
who tries natural first and then
Mhm.
goes with pharma, I think that's great.
Oh, yeah.
The doctor I had for the longest time before he retired was very similar. He was into
Mhm,
traditional Chinese medicine as well as Western medicine. He was a
mhm.
traditional Chinese guy. So
Yeah.
he also did acupuncture and cupping and all of that other stuff. Um, but then it just got to be the point where, yeah, I needed the pharmaceuticals. The
Yeah.
other things just weren't working for me anymore. So that's where having somebody who has the wisdom and the humility to say, okay, yeah, this my first approach isn't gonna work. Let's open up, right?
Right.
I think that's important.
I think it
Yeah, because
also
I
helps
hate taking
to
pills.
yeah. And now, like, just some my own self-disclosure, like, apart from my training, I've
Hmm.
been on some kind of antidepressant since I was, like, 13 years old, like, with
Mm.
with breaks here and there,
Hmm.
but that's been a part of my life for a long time, and there was so I understand that perspective from the position of both a patient and as a
Hmm.
therapist, as
Yeah.
someone who's worked with people who are being prescribed lots of meds and they're sick of it because none of it seems to work, and I
Yes.
also know what it's like to try to go in and spill your guts to somebody who you just met and have
Oh
them
yeah.
throw a pill at you. That's rough.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Something I am gonna say that if you have gotten to the point where you are on pharmaceutical drugs for something like bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, any number of things that is not supposed to have an end date to it,
Mhm.
please don't try to go off your meds on your own.
Yes,
Please get your
that's
doctor to
very
help you
important.
because there can be some serious
Yeah.
physical ramifications that happen if you are not
Mhm.
careful trying to get off of these. Like some of them can kill you. Tommy has
That's
told
very
you if
true.
you take benzodiazepines and you try to
Oh,
go
that's
off of
yeah.
them,
Don't try to do that on your
overdo-
own.
you can't do it. Brian says he takes as few medications as possible. He takes stuff for
Mhm.
his gastro issues, but that's about it. And I think that's very fair. I think that's very, very
Yeah.
fair. Um, you saw me chewing on something, Tums.
Tums. Not sponsored.
I made the
Hashtag not
mistake of
sponsored.
having
Unless you
something.
are, I don't know. I said hashtag not sponsored, unless you are, and I just don't know.
No, no, I wish. No,
Okay.
unfortunately I ate something I shouldn't have for supper, and now my stomach is deciding to be upset. So Miss Dragon was on Lexapro when it first came out and didn't know about the withdrawals, and she was to wean herself off.
Speaking
That
from a
was
personal
probably
experience, I've
difficult.
been I've been on Lexapro for, like how old am I? I'm 37. I've been on Lexapro since I was, like, 22. Uh, I just recently started tapering off of it with a doctor's guidance. Like, it's a
Exactly.
really slow taper because 'cause I've been on it so long, but I
Hmm.
know that one. That one had funny I mean, it's different the funny thing about a lot of psychiatric medications is they hit different people differently because 'cause we're all a little bit different biologically, and that's
Exactly.
where kind of the art of communicating with the doctor about what you're feeling and what you're experiencing and
Yeah.
them listening to you. That's what I would say if you don't feel like your doctor or psychiatrist is listening to you, find another one
Hmm.
because that's so important that they listen to what you're feeling as you're on these things.
Completely.
It's so important.
Yes, absolutely. And what doctor is good for me won't necessarily be the right person for somebody else.
That's true. I like a really blunt doctor. Not everybody
I
likes
will
that.
blunt. My doctor, I brought my daughter to my doctor because my doctor's female, and my daughter's like, I don't want to have a male doctor touching me in places that I don't want a male to touch me.
Mhm.
And
That's
I'm like,
fair.
that's very fair.
That's
So she started going to
very
my
normal.
doctor. My doctor wouldn't listen to her because she was
That's
young,
yeah.
and she's
Oh
great with
gosh.
me. But
Because you're
my
closer
daughter
in
felt
age.
very unheard with this doctor,
Yeah,
which
that's not gonna
was not
work.
my experience. But then again, I'm also quite assertive as well when it comes to my healthcare.
That helps a lot.
That helps a whole
Uh,
lot.
it's especially important for I mean, it's important for everybody to be assertive in their healthcare, but it's especially important for women to be assertive in their healthcare because historically there's a lot
Hmm.
historically where a lot of things for women were medicalized and, women are kind of like treated as like perpetual children, even as adults. And like the man in the
Yeah.
family knows what's best for her care. And so,
Hmm.
I mean, it's important for everybody to assert for themselves, but
Hmm.
there's whole books been written about it for women to be assertive for themselves in healthcare, especially around things like childbirth and
Right.
pregnancy care. So,
Yeah.
kind of
I've I've
digressed a little bit.
I've uh, I've heard people say that studies on heart medications, on um, arthritic medications, and things like that were done generally on men
A
and
lot of
not
studies.
on women.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
woman's physiology, the women's pain reaction is not being treated equally to how a man's would
Yeah.
be treated. So
Right.
that's a whole nother study right there.
Yeah. That is what I have read too, is that a lot of the initial studies on a lot of medications and a lot of interventions were done with men. And at first, that's just to like from a scientific method perspective, that's just to give you a control group
That's
where
right.
so you've got a good scientific basis. You can write your paper and say, the difference was definitely due to the medication and not because it worked better for women than for men. So
Hmm.
they might start out with those studies, but ideally you're then following up with studies with women and then following up with studies with both. And um,
Hmm.
sometimes there's kind of a push to get those treatments and those medications out maybe before all that stuff has been
Exactly.
done.
Yeah.
And women have all kinds of different hormonal things happening that are going to
Absolutely.
change the way we experience pain. Like
Women are complex.
well, men are too, but in their own way, right?
Yes, they are. They are.
Yeah. That's one thing I've learned. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up with brothers, and I kind of had this like view of men as like, you're not that you're not that complicated. But I've met a lot of different people in the last decade or two, and I've learned that yeah, men are really complex too, actually.
They really are. Yeah.
Depending on it's all individual basis though, right? Like every now and then you meet a person who's not that complex.
Some people are a bit more simple than others
Yeah. Yeah.
in many different ways. Let's just put that.
Sure, sure. But everybody has something to me, everybody has something fascinating about them. Even the person who looks like the simplest person in the entire world has something fascinating about their world and their experience and how they got to be the way they are. And that's one of my favorite things about working with people in therapeutic relationships is finding what is it that makes you you and makes you awesome and encouraging more of that and helping them amplify that. That's one of
Right.
my favorite things.
Yeah. Mary says that the doctor didn't want to give her pain medication for fibro because it's not something that's used, but it's what works for her body, and she uses it responsibility. And she uses it responsibly. It was a fight.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
a little. Yeah, Mary told us a little bit. Um, I mean, there's all kinds of things that your doctor might try first, but at the end of the
Mhm.
day, it has to be what works for you and what's safe for you
Absolutely.
and what allows
Yeah.
you to function, you know?
Yeah.
And that's between you and your doctor, you know?
And if you're not functional, like if you can't have a functional life, um, oh, this is going to get into eugenics. Never mind. I'm leaving that alone.
That's another show.
That's a whole nother network.
We
That's
can
not
come you
happening
wanna
on
come
this
do
show.
you wanna come do that on my channel where we're not scared to scare people off?
I'll talk eugenics on your show. Sure. Sure.
I'll lose half my subscribers.
I only have 100 and
I don't know
something.
if
I
I will.
can't
I might
afford to
not.
lose any.
I don't know. Sorry?
I said I only have 100 or so, and something. I can't afford to lose any subscribers.
You're right, yeah, I just hit 100, so,
Oh, did you?
um, yeah,
Yay!
yeah. That just blew my mind because when I started posting things on YouTube, I started it as kind of an experiment, kind of like to
Hmm.
get used to, like, talking about things and hearing my own voice and interacting with people and, maybe improve my confidence a little bit while I was at it, and
Yeah,
then people started interacting with me and, like, I started seeing people I've come to be friends with come to live streams I did, and, so now it's kinda taken on a different life for me, it's kinda turned into something else, and
absolutely.
I'm a little bit hooked now. Like, that's how
I
I got to know
started,
you.
well, yeah. I started because we've totally gone off topic, but that's okay. Kind of in an
We
organic,
squirreled
free
off.
kind of
Yeah,
way. Just there's like,
yeah.
oh,
I'm
we were
joining you where
talking
you're
about
at,
September.
Kim.
Oh,
That's what we're
that's
doing.
pardon.
Bringing it right back. I'm joining you where you're at. I'm coming
There you
alongside you.
go. You're
See? We
bringing it
brought it
back to
full circle.
center. Yes,
Full
that's
circle.
right. Full circle. Um, Mary says you're not going to scare this girl off. Yeah, Mary's a
I
little tough
believe
to scare.
that.
I'll give her that.
I believe that. Mary's
Um,
tough. Mary
Mary's
walks
tough.
the walk.
She does. She sure does. And I totally forgot where I was going. That was off the channel somewhere. But
Let's see.
anyway,
Where did we go? I think we changed the topic off of eugenics. I think we
we
did
did.
manage
We
to
did
get
change the topic off of eugenics. Yes. And if you don't know what eugenics is, look it up.
a lot of
Um,
intersection with the history of neurodivergence and autism research involved in that too, interestingly enough. There's another show.
yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Neurodiversity is ironically the norm more
Yeah,
than normalcy is.
yeah,
Because there's like 18,000 different neurodivergencies, and then there's only one type of neurotypical, right?
right.
So it's like there's typical, and then there's everything else. So
I
yeah.
feel like once you get to know a person better,
Hmm.
there aren't that many like neurotypical people, you
No, there
know?
really aren't.
Everybody's got something really special about the way their
Hmm.
brain works, at least
Yeah, I agree.
that I have seen. And I haven't met everybody yet, but So far, everyone I've met has a very unique way of approaching things and
That's
working
where I
things
was
out in their
going.
brain.
Is why I started my channel. So that's what it was. Excuse me. When I was growing up, we moved around a ton. So I got to know so many different people from all over the place. And
Wow.
the first person I met of African descent was in northern Alberta. So the first two people actually that I knew of African descent, and they were not only of African descent, they were directly from Africa. So
Oh,
they were both from Ethiopia and came to school in Canada at that school. So I like people. I like stories. I like culture. My
I do
whole life,
too.
accents have fascinated me.
Yes, I love
Yeah.
that. I wish I could do all of them, but I
Oh, I
can't.
can't do all of them, but I can do a few. Don't ask me to
Can
right now.
you?
I'd have to listen to it
Could
first.
you make some shorts where you just do different accents? I would love that.
Well, I could do some shorts maybe where I say thank you to people in different languages because I
Okay,
can say
okay.
thank you in more than 40. So
That's
I'm thinking,
awesome. I
well,
love
I've
that.
had so many students. I teach ESL, right? I'm still teaching ESL, English as a subsequent language. And I've had my students teach me how to say thank you. First of all, I only want to learn one or two phrases because I want them to know more English than I know of their language.
Sure.
I think it's only fair. So I can tell them, you are smarter than me because you know more English than I know of your language. And for a student who has zero English and are not literate in their home country, like they can't even write their own name in their own language.
Wow.
Yeah. That's who I started teaching when I was teaching English as a subsequent language.
Wow.
So yeah. So when I can look at those people and they understand the words, you are smarter than me. Like there's a lot of actions going on and stuff, but they get
Mhm.
it when you say it. And they're like, no, teacher, no, no, no. And then you explain why. They're like, oh,
And then does
oh.
something open up for them? Like, they suddenly see possibilities where they
They
didn't
see
feel like there were
possibilities
any?
instead of feeling like they're nothing or less than or whatever. They see the possibility of growth and
That's
of
beautiful.
the fact that I can respect them because they're smart. I'm not going to look down on them because they're nothing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that was a large part of my life for a lot of years. Right out of high school, I became a hairdresser. Again, lots and lots of people, lots and lots of cultures, lots and lots of clients. Um, at one particular place where I worked, I was the least racist one there. So I ended up with a lot of First Nations people or a lot of Indigenous people from northern part of the province.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that became a large part of my clientele for a number of years. Then I moved to the city where I'm
Some
close to
people will
now.
tell you that the local hairdresser is like the village therapist, like the one that the
Exactly.
people choose to be the therapist. Not maybe you don't have
Exactly.
the letters, but people
Yep.
trust you that way,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
Touching somebody's head is so intimate. I mean, would
It
you
is.
like just
Yeah.
go up to somebody in the grocery store and say, "Excuse me, can I rub your head?"
Yeah,
Well,
no.
okay, I might, but I'm weird. So,
Right,
um,
but then you could say, "It's alright, I was a hairdresser. I know what I'm doing."
I have done
I
that. Oh, I've
appreciate
done the I don't or trust me, I was a hairdresser thing. Um,
it.
but
Actually,
yeah, Miss is right, exactly right. We all have our own little quirks. Life would be
yeah,
totally boring if we were all the same. Exactly.
it definitely would, it absolutely would.
Yeah.
That's I identify with you. I love people too, and I love people's stories. Um, I didn't move around a lot as a kid though.
Mm.
I was in one town. I grew up in one town from the age of 2, and I mean, I got to travel some really cool places. I was lucky enough to do that, but I never lived anywhere else. And I
Mhm.
think it was when I went to college that I really started because you meet people who like come in from different countries to study and things like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And and I loved hearing about different people's backgrounds and stories and where they came from and what life was like for them. And it just kind of like opened the world up to me. And
Yeah.
um, like lately, since everybody started working remotely and things like that, I've had less opportunity, to interact with different people from different places. But now here, kind of meeting you guys, like, first from the lifeboat and then these other channels,
Okay.
I've kind of
I
gotten
think
to.
I'm back on.
Oh, did you freeze?
Kristen, there we go. Okay.
Am I back? Am I here?
We both froze. So
Oh,
huzzah, we're back.
I hope I
Um,
froze in the least flattering facial expression possible so I can take a screenshot of it for fun. Yes.
my daughters,
Just rip off the Band-Aid.
they grew up in the same place from the time they were 2 and 3 years old as well. And we still live in that same place where they grew up. But because I was teaching adults, I wasn't able to do school breaks, I guess. So when kids had their school breaks, I didn't necessarily have a school break. So I'd bring them to work.
Right.
And so they didn't get to, they got to travel some, but they also got to see the world because they got to come to work with me. And I was
That's
teaching people
cool.
from all over the world. And the best
Oh,
days
wow.
at work were potlucks. Because, I mean, you want to have good Afghan food, get an Afghani mama or Afghani
Right.
granny to
Right.
make
The
it for you.
person who
Oh,
grew up
baby.
making food that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely is wonderful. So once I was no longer working outside of the home, I missed having humans. So the whole thing with Tommy and the lifeboat and connection being the key to everything really resonated with me. So I started my own channel. And I grew up in a Christian home, and the Bible is very important to me. And there's a very common saying is, am I my brother's keeper? And yeah, I'm my brother's keeper, my sister's keeper, my mother's keeper, my father's keeper, my dad, like all of these different keepers. I am my other's keeper. And so I'm like, that's a good name.
It is.
That's how
It
I came up
is.
with the name
I
for my
love that.
channel is I am my other's keeper.
I think I
So yeah,
remember when you started your channel. I think I lurked for a little bit. Maybe I said hello. Like, I've been
okay.
popping up in your chats on your channel for a while before I started posting anything. I've
Yeah,
always
yeah.
enjoyed your channel.
Oh, I'm so
For a lot of the
glad.
same reasons that you say that you started it was because I love hearing other
Yeah.
people's stories and perspectives, and I've missed that too, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I worked a corporate job for the past 7 years, and I used to travel for that job. I used to travel
Oh,
at least to different places in my state, but then we all
right.
went remote, everything shut
Yeah.
down, and we never went back, like,
Yeah.
so I'm just sitting at this computer. All of my interaction with people is, like, mostly through emails and instant messages. Like
Yeah. But you don't
like,
even
we
do like Zoom or
barely
anything like that?
we do now, but
Okay.
it's been
Yeah.
like a gradual. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been like a
Pre-pandemic.
gradual reintegration of it,
That's
but
right.
a lot of people resist the camera thing, and I understand why some people do,
Yeah.
um, but there's really something to being able to look someone in the face, even if you don't get true eye contact because it's through a
Yeah.
screen. But then you're at work and you've got the whole corporate thing, and you don't have a lot of time to talk about each other's lives and stories and where you come from because you're just, like,
Right.
grinding out the daily productivity,
Yeah.
and
And you're
there's
not
not
together,
much
so you're not going to
community
go out
there.
for lunch somewhere. You're not going to go have those water cooler
Exactly.
conversations or, gossip over
Exactly.
the dividers.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
the first year I worked there, I did commute every day to an office, and I mean, there's part of it is a drag because you are in a cubicle farm, but I
Yeah.
did at least I got to meet with my manager face to face, like, every time I met with her, like, in
Yeah.
the same office together, and
Yeah.
we developed this level of trust in each other that you just don't get when the only time you ever interact is, like, on the phone or in an
That's right.
email,
Yeah.
you know?
It's completely different.
And
Actually, my daughter, my older daughter, my younger daughter, as far as I know, she's only ever had one boyfriend, and that lasted less than a month.
mm,
But my older daughter has had two boyfriends, and they've each been for a very long time, and she met them both online um, in,
really?
in different gaming groups. And
Oh,
so
wow.
she doesn't live close to either one of them. The first one lived in the United States. They never met face to face in person, but they did
Wow.
video calls. And this is pre-pandemic. So this is before it was popular. And then
Yeah.
her current boyfriend, um, it's just, they've been dating for a year and a half now. Yeah, a year and a half now.
Wow.
And yeah, they live in different provinces. So they're, what, 8 hours, 10 hours away from each other. But again, they want to have dinner together. She plucks her phone down, and there we are. We have dinner together, and
That's
that's
so
it's
cool.
great because
I
I can
think
now
if you
talk
do
to
it
my best
right,
friend with
yeah.
at a distance.
I
And
think if you do it right, you can really connect with people very deeply this way.
I
But
agree.
we didn't know how to do it at first. And
No.
and you do have to put in a lot of time, like, talking to each other, right?
Hmm.
And sharing about each other's lives and worlds, like, maybe even more so than when you're physically in the same room. And I didn't get that community from work at all because, once they sent us home, it was like, now you can go from meeting to meeting, and now you can do 10 more things in a day because you're not
Exactly.
chatting in the cubicles. And it's just,
That's right.
yeah, there's no
Yeah, you don't have to
community
spend the
there.
15 minutes to get from this office to that office. You can just
Exactly.
take the 30 seconds it takes to log off of this one and onto that one. Like
It's not
it's
unusual. So I'll say I'm working out my last month there. I put in my notice, but it's not unusual for me to have like back to back work meetings on my calendar from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon.
Mhm,
And so sometimes get double and triple booked, and nobody
mhm.
thinks to put like 15 minutes in between them because they're like, oh, well, you can just click right on over to it. It's like people
Yeah.
forget, oh, actually, you might need to get up and go to the bathroom or take a stretch or
Or
something like
somebody may
that.
take extra time, right?
Yeah, sometimes,
So you
yeah.
get
Like,
5 minutes behind in this meeting, an hour and a half later, you're 25, 30 minutes behind because it's 5, 5,
mhm.
5, 5, 5, 5. It does
Yeah,
it all over the place.
it's not a sustainable way of doing things. It's just
No, it's
not.
not. No. Okay,
Um,
so to get back to reality, everybody's individual reality.
back to
Ah,
life.
So basically the long and the short of it is be curious. Meet the person where
Yes.
they're at in their reality as long as it's a safe place, safe for
Yes.
you, safe for
Yeah,
them, safe for everybody around. Um
exactly.
yeah, that's that, and treat them with respect. So,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
I feel like that's the ground level of any kind of relationship is respect for where the person is at and not
Absolutely.
asking them to be something that they're not or that they're not comfortable with.
Exactly. And that in any relationship, whether it be a work relationship, a school relationship, a friendship, a family relationship, even sometimes family relationships are even more important because they're not going away or they shouldn't be going away, you
Mhm.
know? So there are some people who don't get along with their family. So they now have a chosen family that they live with or not
Right,
live with, that
right.
they exist with.
That they talk
Um,
with.
yeah. Yeah. I have a
I
very
mean,
good
I would
friend.
say, yeah.
I have a very
So
good friend who grew up in a
therapeutically, if
home
you want.
that was just devastating, her home that she grew up in.
Oh gosh.
And she has now a chosen family. And the people are much nicer, you know?
I love that we can do that, you
Me
know?
too.
I think that's really important because I like human beings, like even if you're the most introverted human being in the world, we're still social creatures to some
Yes,
degree. Like
absolutely.
maybe an introverted person needs very little of it, but they still need some connection. They still
Hmm.
need some. Very bad things happen when people get completely disconnected from their fellow human beings. Um,
Yes.
so even if
Yeah.
you're even if you don't need a lot of social interaction, we need
You
a
need
little.
some.
We're built that way.
We really are created for community, aren't we? Like, doesn't have to be everybody's the same community. It doesn't even have to look even close to the same. But
Exactly.
there is, what is it? Tommy says there is a pot or a lid for every pot, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah, lid for every pot.
Yeah.
I've also
So,
heard there's a foot for every shoe.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
There are so many inappropriate places my brain goes. And I'm not talking like dirty. I'm talking like there's a finger for every nose. Like there's that. When I say inappropriate, that's the kind of stuff that I mean.
I love that. That's funny. My 5-year-old would like that one. We are
Yeah,
constantly
exactly.
working on the finger in the nose thing.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know how the sound is. If y'all hear him in the background, he's okay. His dad is in charge. He's good. If y'all hear him, he's vocal sometimes, my
I
little
can't
guy,
hear
but
him,
he's
but
okay.
that doesn't mean a whole lot.
He's being supervised.
Awesome. And
It
Mary
is
is right.
just
We are
stick him in
working
the
on
living
this
room.
friend thing together. And
Yes. Yes.
I think that's exactly what we're all about. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Kristen, for coming.
Thank you for having me,
You've been a good
Kim.
guest. I mean, honestly, you've been wonderful. And
I really love
so
this.
people
This is
know,
great.
I have invited Kristen to join me the first Thursday of the month from now until the end of eternity. You're stuck.
I love it. I love it. You're stuck with me.
You're stuck with me. Yes.
Unless you just need one night
So,
off. I guess you can have one night off.
okay. So if you do have any questions that you want Kristen and I to discuss, whether they're psychological based, whether they are social based, whether they are whatever, if you just want to hear the two of us rant off on a wild variety of things, because as we see, we can't stay in a straight line. It just doesn't happen.
No, but we seem to have always gone somewhere interesting. So I mean, that's what
That's right.
matters, right?
And that's the important part. Yes, absolutely. So let us know, and I will see you all again soon.
Thank you so
See
much for
you.
having me, Kim. And thank
You're
you
very
guys for
welcome.
watching.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye.